Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We're going to do a lot on today's show, some of it fun, maybe some of it slightly less so. Kirby Smart obviously spoke out yesterday on a number of offseason topics. We'll have some things to say about that here coming up in just a moment, and we'll talk about how Georgia's potentially using all of this to pivot towards the upcoming season, so we'll kind of address that. We will also have some fun today, as promised, because it's interesting to see the way in which a topic that we've addressed a lot of course, the last couple of weeks is kind of starting to blow up a little bit more on social media. And I think there's a fairly straightforward opinion to be expressed about that. And we'll kind of talk about that. And I'll do something I don't love to do, which is admit how maybe I might have gotten something wrong here. So we will do that here coming up in just a couple of moments, too. And a big preview of SEC Media Days there as well, because it is next week. It will be fascinating. And all of that is on the table. So what do you say we go ahead and get it started? And truly, sincerely, genuinely, this and every day, glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Eventually on today's show, we're going to have some fun. Kirk Herbstreit, Reese Davis back at it again, talking Georgia football. So we will have a response to some of what they had to say. We've enjoyed that this offseason. We'll have some fun with that here in a little bit. We're also looking ahead to SEC Media Days. We're going to get very serious into the preview of that, beyond just what's going on there with Georgia. So fun on tap on this show eventually, as it hopefully is each and every day. But I do want to begin with what happened in Athens yesterday. Kirby Smart, press conference talking about a number of offseason issues. And I think there's one thing that I need to sort of address off the top, and after that, we'll kind of talk about some of the other things there as well. You know, a lot of you have kind of wondered if I'm going to offer any kind of response to the response that Georgia and Kirby Smart gave yesterday to some reporting that you may have recently read in the AJC. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not a part of the AJC investigative reporting team. I'm not really privy to their processes in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So because of that, it'd be inappropriate for me to comment. I'm going to leave any commentary on that to kind of come from them. And I'm sure at some point in time, you know, they'll have some feedback on this in some form or fashion, and I'm going to just kind of leave that to them. So I know some of you are aware of that. I want to just sort of say that off the top and then sort of move on to some of the other stuff that's out there, because that's not the only thing that Georgia coach Kirby Smart talked about yesterday. And there's one aspect of what Smart addressed that I do think is probably worth examining a little bit more, because a lot of you know what the timeline has been like for Georgia over the course of these past few months. It starts in January with a story that we continue to be incredibly sad about, and Georgia fans are united in the sadness related to the tragedy of, you know, Devin Willick, Chandler LaCroix, the car crash that cost them their lives. That's been incredibly sad. And it's also just sort of common sense to assume that anytime there's some sort of, you know, situation like that, a lot of questions going to be asked about, you know, maybe what was going on there on that. And one of the things that has been put into the spotlight in the aftermath of what happened back in January is the issue potentially with Georgia football players and speeding and maybe reckless driving. And there's been some talk out there about the sheer number of incidents there and the high speeds that at times Georgia players have been pulled over for driving. And Kirby Smart talked a lot about that yesterday. And some of what Smart said there, I think, is probably worth unpacking a little bit more as Georgia admittedly tries to pivot away from this in the offseason and start to kind of really put its process in place for the upcoming season. That's, you know, kind of where we are right now. There's one quote in particular, and you can go to DawgNation.com and you can read the full story of Smart on this particular issue. But I want to pull out something that Kirby Smart had to say, because I thought that Smart was, you know, kind of introspective in all of this. Can I show the Kirby Smart quote here of Smart yesterday saying on the issue of speeding and what has maybe gone on with some Georgia players? He says, it's a tough situation to manage when you have 18 to 22-year-old men. A lot of them are driving for the first time. Every fall, we have 25 new guys. We've averaged 5 guys who come here at 18 years old with no driver's license, and we continue to work at it. I don't have the exact answer. This is the part that I think is interesting. Smart saying, I don't have the exact answer. I wish I did, but we will continue to work at it. You can read more of that from Kirby Smart there at DawgNation.com on that particular subject. And I want to park on this for a moment because it's Smart saying, hey, admittedly, this is an issue. It's an issue that we want to address, and I can't sit here today and tell you that I've got every possible solution to this fully laid out. And I think in some respects, conversations like this end up being a little bit of a template for how we talk about everything related to college football, because I think that people bring sometimes into a discussion like this, the issue, well, in this specific case, players speeding, things like that, I think people bring some preconceived notions into a discussion like this, no matter what vantage point you kind of come from. You have sort of a history with this topic, and you bring some preconceived notions into the conversation, and some of those may not be true. Some of those may actually be myths. And one of these I've sort of addressed before is that I think sometimes there's this belief that there's a certain stripe of college football fan that doesn't care about anything that his favorite team does, the coaches, the players, anything else. That doesn't care about anything else. He only wants to win. And I was candid about this the other day, and I'll repeat myself here right now. The truth is, I've never met a Georgia fan who would ever, at least that has said to me or through actions would seem to lead you to believe that had no sense of moral compass, no sense of right and wrong, only to go back and use, I guess, what was the Oakland Raiders who made this line famous back in the 60s, 70s, whenever it was, just win, baby, that somehow winning and losing football games, the idea of that superseded any sense of right and wrong. I've never met a Georgia fan who felt that way. And a lot of Georgia fans may be like, yeah, you're right, BA, I never have either. But to go beyond that a step further, I've never met an Alabama fan, a Tennessee fan, an Auburn fan, a Florida fan who feels that way either. That the truth is that it's easy to sort of characterize in the kind of rivalry back and forth conversation that we do of, we care about the right things here with our favorite team, but those losers up there in Knoxville or those idiots down there in Gainesville, all they care about is winning and losing. The truth is, to give a fair shot here to the other SEC teams, even though everybody from time to time may have a story with their program they're not particularly proud of, I have never really met any kind of fans. Sometimes the online behavior may lead you to believe this is true, but in the personal interactions that I've had with actual real people, I've never met anybody who would either through their words or through their actions lead you to believe that winning and losing was more important than any kind of sense of right or wrong whatsoever. That's just not something that I see existing around the SEC, and I'm fairly comfortable and confident when I tell you that. The other thing that kind of comes up in a conversation like this, when you see what to the naked eye sort of appears to be a large number of speeding issues for Georgia going back, however much you want to go back here, even some Georgia fans have expressed some concern about this of, gosh, it seems like it's a lot of people kind of having issue with this, or some of the issues we've heard about seem to be like a really excessive speed. And Smart himself talked about that some yesterday too, of, the fact that the speed at which some of these guys have been traveling may be more serious, more significant than the total number of instances overall. And some Georgia fans have expressed some concern about that. Of, gosh, what is going on here? This does seem to be a little bit alarming. And there's another pocket of Georgia fans in the midst of all of that who've sort of said, okay, I'd like to have some additional context. And like one of the things you hear some Georgia fans say is, okay, well, so Georgia's had X number of instances, and I'm not actually, sure what the total number of instances are, but it's been reported to have been a lot. That seems like a lot, but what the Georgia fan says is, well, let me compare that to so-and-so school, big state university over here, or prominent program over there. Let me have that a little bit of additional context. And admittedly, that's probably a little bit difficult to gather. I'm certainly not resourced enough to probably be able to do that. But what I did notice, because I did just a little bit of research, I'm talking about the very most, minimal amount of research. And what I did notice is, and there was a nonprofit organization called TRIP, T-R-I-P, and I guess they do some reporting on this. And I guess the most recent reporting out there may have come out a year ago, kind of looking back at the previous couple of years before that. So from the period of 2019 through 2021 here in the state of Georgia, according to a nonprofit organization called TRIP, that there was a 21% increase in Georgia driving fatalities over the course of that period of time. Now, it's not for me to say why that might have been the case and what the reasons for that, but this nonprofit, who's not involved in like football in any way, they're just into the traffic thing, from reporting a fairly large increase in traffic fatalities in Georgia over a couple of year span, kind of around the pandemic and that time. And I guess some of the national organizations that cover the same thing are reporting some similar stuff here, that the traffic fatalities nationally reached a 16-year high in 2021. And so my point for bringing that up is that some of what may have happened here may also be a part of a larger story that, and maybe you've noticed this in your own right, that the road just seem to get more dangerous, even in kind of like the boring suburbs where I live. I feel like I'm dodging cars all the time now, and some of the national and local data may add some support to that. So for the people who've said, okay, what's the context all this comes in, that may be, at least part of the context here is that roads for many of us just appear to be getting more dangerous, and some of the statistics out there seem to back that up. That doesn't absolve Georgia here from this particular issue, but it is kind of context that's being discussed, or should be discussed and be a part of this issue as we kind of move forward with it. And then a couple more points here real quick, and then after that we'll kind of move on to something more fun. There are a couple of other myths that I do think are probably worth at least kind of considering here when it comes to issues like this. Kirby Smart speaking out on a number of topics yesterday, including a relatively large number of speeding citations for his team and excessive, reckless driving type issues that Georgia has been reported to have had. I think there's a misbegotten notion out there a little bit that Georgia, Kirby Smart in this case as the coach, would be incentivized to allow his players to do whatever they want to do. I just think that to some people seems true of, well, if you're a coach, you want to overlook what your players are doing because it makes it easier for you to get good players, makes it easier for you to win. And honestly, given the time that I've spent around college football, not just Georgia, but college football in general, and the recruiting process, which is, after all, the lifeblood of college football, I'm actually not quite so sure that's as incentivized as some people think that it might be. Because the thing that we get wrong sometimes about recruiting is we focus on a very small number of recruits, a very narrow sliver of the overall picture of what recruiting's all about. And when you have a really glamorous player who kind of comes from a very hyped up background, something like that, the perception that we have, because we've seen movies, we've heard stories, or whispers this, whisper that, is, this player just gets to do whatever he wants to do. But if that is true for anybody, that's a very small sliver of anything in the overall total picture of college football. In other words, sometimes we think, especially in this day and age of NIL, that players are entering into a recruiting conversation on kind of a transactional basis of, what can you give to me? What kind of money can I get? What kind of freedom can I enjoy? What kind of lavish lifestyle can I live and have at your program? And that becomes, I think, in the perception of some, the way in which some players, a lot of players, maybe even the majority of players in the eyes of some, are choosing their college experience. But having spent a lot of time around high school football here in our state and college programs, not just Georgia, but all across the SEC and elsewhere, what I'm going to tell you is that a large measure of the recruiting process is not transactional, it's still relational. And a lot of the families that are part of the recruiting process, y'all, they're actually remarkably traditional. And if you could get into the recruiting process as deeply as Jeff Sentell gets to do it as a reporter here, and as deeply as I get to do it because I work with a recruiting, like I don't cover recruiting, I follow recruiting, but I do get a chance to hang around with Jeff Sentell. I have some other friends who cover recruiting. And when you get really deep into the recruiting process, what you're going to find out is the recruiting process, even though blowhards like me make a big deal of the hat shows and all the glitz and glamour of recruiting, the actual nuts and bolts of recruiting is actually pretty traditional. And the number one question that comes up in the recruiting process is, for a mama especially, because we know how mamas drive the boat when it comes to recruiting, mamas ask the question of, are you going to be a good steward of my son? If I entrust my son to you, one of the most precious possessions I have, literally, are you going to be a good steward of that? And so the idea that it would be incentivized then for Georgia to let players run wild and act recklessly, drive recklessly, and that would be a good way to get good players, I think the deeper you are in the recruiting process, you realize actually that's not particularly incentivized. That mamas don't want their sons, even though these are fully grown men and could bounce me on every wall in this room, these are still their mama's sons, right? And mamas still see their sons as their babies, for lack of a better word. And mamas want their sons to be entrusted to coaches who are going to do right by them. And they don't want their sons hanging around bad dudes doing the wrong things. So the idea that it would be incentivized for Kirby Smart or any kind of coach to allow reckless or bad behavior, I don't think that's as incentivized as maybe some might think that it is, which sort of kind of circles back to the quote that Kirby Smart gave a moment ago of, So we're still trying to figure out what to do about this. It seems like everybody agrees there's been too much speeding. It seems like in the case of some of these instances, they have been at an alarming rate of speed. And so Kirby Smart asked the question of, okay, well, what do you do about it? And this is the point where I guess I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox here, because I do believe that once again, there's this misunderstanding that sometimes goes on about some of this kind of stuff, where I think some people view this as, from Kirby Smart's perspective, a crime that needs to be punished. And I think the more correct way to view this is maybe more just along the lines of a problem that needs to be solved. In other words, I'm not quite so sure that coming down hard excessively on the next person to get a speeding ticket does anything to correct the overall problem that might exist with a large organization that has 85 scholarship players, even more than that when you come to walk-ons, people associated with the program as staffers and things like that. I'm just not quite so sure that's the case. And this is a little bit of a personal story for me. I mean, I have not lived a very interesting life in terms of, checkered behavior in my past and things like that. But if you want to go back to my past, I do have a little bit of a history of driving too fast, especially when I was younger. When I was 18 years old, I got a speeding ticket that was so fast I got taken to jail. Now, I didn't have to stay there very long, thankfully, but it was a serious speeding ticket. And you might think, well, that's enough to scare you straight. 18-year-old kid like me, getting put in the back of a police car, that's all I would have needed to know. And yet, I was actually thinking about this morning. A year or so later, I got another speeding ticket. A couple of years after that, I got another speeding ticket. Even as an adult, I got a speeding ticket and had to pay big-time bucks down there. Just be careful when you're driving on I-16 because your wallet's going to be a lot lighter if you're not. So the point is that when Kirby Smart says, hey, this is an issue, we're trying to figure out how to solve it, like that's a thing that probably hits home for a lot of us. And I'm not trying to absolve or excuse any of this. I'm really not. But I think the words that Smart used yesterday are very, very honest. And I think that he is being really, really sincere when he says, that Georgia's in the process of trying to figure this all out. And many of us will be watching very closely to kind of see how that he does. Now, let me, I guess, sort of say one more thing, and then we'll kind of sort of move on to a happier subject matter. Admittedly, this is a football show, and eventually, our gravitational pull is back towards the game itself, what's happening between the white lines. And on an issue like this, we're going to be no different. I do think if you're a Georgia fan and you're thinking, okay, what's going to happen when this team starts playing games this fall? What's going to happen as the team starts getting prepared for the upcoming season? I do think some of what Georgia did yesterday does lay the groundwork as it pivots towards SEC Media Days, selecting Brock Bowers and Cedric Von Prongranger and Kamari Lasser to be there at Media Days next week. I do think this lays the groundwork for Georgia to start talking about football. And just because you're talking about football doesn't mean that other issues don't matter and other issues aren't important. But eventually, it's like the old Bill Belichick line about do your job. Georgia's got a job to do. It's a job to get ready for the upcoming season. In the midst of a lot of other issues yesterday, I think Georgia is now getting back to the business of the season at hand and using SEC Media Days now as a chance to talk about what's going to actually happen on the football field, because when any other question comes up, Kirby Smart can now rightly say that has already been addressed. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video. 9:45, we start 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and we are available as a podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, world-famous DawgNation.com. We try to put the show out there in a lot of different ways, a lot of different platforms, and we're just very, very thankful to have you a part of it, no matter what platform you choose to use. And I am so grateful for our friends, like our sponsor today, Breda Pest Management, make it all possible. Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And y'all, what is it? Is it inside 50 days now? Some of y'all are better at the countdown stuff than I am, but it ain't far away from now. We're going to be there in Sanford Stadium. Admittedly, it's just Tennessee Martin. It's almost a night game at 6 p.m. But the point is, when you're there and you're looking around, you see 93,000 people between the hedges, you're going to know bugs, critters, termites, nowhere to be found, because our friends at Breda Pest Management protect Sanford Stadium for UGA, and they protect all those other athletic venues there as well. And the same level of protection that Breda Pest Management is entrusted to provide UGA with, they can provide that for you there as well. And there is a tangible benefit for you making the switch to Breda Pest Management that is worth your attention, because the resources they have, the level of service they have a history of providing, all of that can be leveraged for your benefit. What I mean is, in business since 1975, 125 employees, taking care of business all across our great state. And when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management, you're going to put more money back in your pocket instantly just for making that decision. So whatever fly-by-night company you're working with, your termite protection, a letter in the mail, service going up, cost of service going up, quality of service going down, that is not the case with Breda Pest Management. So please, find them online. It's Breda.com. B-R-E-D-A. I should say BredaPest.com, excuse me. BredaPest.com. BredaPest.com. B-R-E-D-A. BredaPest.com. That will get you in touch with our friends at Breda Pest Management. One more time, since I got it wrong the first time. You'd think after all this time I'd be getting it right. BredaPest.com. B-R-E-D-A. Trust our friends at Breda Pest Management today. All right, we got some fun stuff here coming up on the program today. Before we are done, we're going to look at some of the big questions as it relates to SEC Media Days for a various number of teams across the league. We're also going to preview some of that with Mike Griffith here coming up in just a bit there, too. And on a day in which I could use a laugh, we have one of our better golden shoes in a while. So if you're watching on video especially, you'll like this. And if you're listening radio podcast, I will try to describe it to you. We'll get to all of that coming up in a moment. Prior to that, let's go around the Dawghouse here today. And I think it's interesting to see the ways in which a topic that we have addressed a good number of times on our show. And by the way, we're also, I guess, supported today once again by Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, which is an exciting thing. But a topic that we've addressed now for a little bit is also kind of back in the world of social media a little bit, too. You may have read this at DawgNation.com yesterday. So we've had issue this offseason with Kirk Herbstreit, Reese Davis, prominent voices, very, very well-known, recognizable figures. You know, ESPN's College Game Day, I think, still matters to a certain extent. It seems to matter less and less every year because of ESPN's own unintentional, unforced demise. But nonetheless, they've kind of made their own decisions on some certain things. But the show still matters. It's still a brand that is recognized, still a platform that matters. Reese Davis is the host. Kirk Herbstreit is kind of the anchor analyst on all of that. And we've kind of noticed and sort of pointed out that Reese Davis has been openly touting Michigan as the number one team in the country over the course of the offseason. Kirk Herbstreit, using some of the worst logic imaginable, a dusty old opinion from like 2 years ago, is out there making the case for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And we've simply pointed out that, hey, it sort of feels like even though Georgia won the last two national championships, the overall narrative about Georgia just hasn't changed that very much. And guys like Reese and Kirk Herbstreit, whether they want to admit this or not, whether they like this about themselves or not, facts are facts, the truth is truth, they drive much of the narrative, especially during the offseason because of the platforms that they're on. And it is going to be noticed, especially by Georgia fans, when guys like Reese and Kirk are out there, saying what they're saying and doing what they're doing. Because as I've said many times before, you can have it one of two ways. You can either laugh at Georgia fans for their belief that so-and-so doesn't believe in them, or you can pick Georgia to be the number one team in the country. Like if you want to say someone else other than Georgia is going to be number one, you can't fault Georgia fans for noticing that. And that seems to be kind of where we are right now. I'm going to show you a Twitter exchange. I'll put this on the screen here for you that Reese Davis, Kirk Herbstreit had together. And, it's sort of dripping with sarcasm here. Reese Davis, let me read the tweet. He's responding to a couple of Georgia fans, I guess, on this. Reese says on Twitter, everybody is more than, quote, giving them a chance, meaning Georgia. He says, just because I want to see the quarterback before I rank them number one instead of number two or number three is hardly insulting. It's amusing to see things like fabricated 7-5 picks. Everyone knows they could send their third team out and go 7-5 or way better. Kirk Herbstreit then kind of retweets Reese Davis and says, RD, meaning Reese Davis, stop it. Everyone secretly hates Georgia, he says sarcastically, and doubts them every step of the way. Hopefully they can beat Vandy this year, and he gives some sort of goofy emoji around all of that. Now, let me do just kind of a little bit on this here for a moment, because this is one of those deals where when Nolan Smith back, I guess it was earlier in the winter sometime, when he was sort of pushing the whole notion of the fact that he made up the claim that Georgia's going to go 7-5, we sort of, had some fun with that at the time there, because while Nolan clearly seemed to enjoy that and revel in that, the truth is, knowing how the media sometimes works, we knew that was going to be used as protection, because there were plenty of people who were saying things about Georgia a year ago. We heard it said, they'll be lucky to win the SEC East after losing 15 draft picks. They won't be able to win the national championship. They were officially picked to be third behind Alabama and Ohio State, and that opinion was essentially unanimous. And for a reigning national champion to be universally disregarded to begin the next season, yes, Georgia fans are going to notice that. And for the same people to sort of trot out similar arguments here again this year, yes, they're going to notice that there as well, because for everybody else, where you rank them matters. For Georgia, it's kind of come down now to sort of a binary choice. Are they your national champion or are they not? And if you're picking somebody else to win the national championship, Georgia fans are going to notice. If you're talking about a team like, say, USC, or a team like Texas, or a team like Clemson, where you rank them matters, because there's sort of a wide range of rankings they may land at. For a team like Georgia, it's either this or it's that. It's either national championship again, or anything else is just, he was the line second, just being the first loser. Like, the season is a success in the eyes of a lot of people about whether or not Georgia wins the national championship. So the only prediction that matters for Georgia is whether or not you're picking them to win the national championship. So when Reese or Kirk or somebody like that says what they says, people are going to notice, especially when Reese Davis points out of, hey, I want to see quarterback before I make any kind of choice here. I want to see what Georgia has the quarterback position. Georgia fans laugh in your face when you say that, because they heard people just like you, whether it was actually you or not, they heard people just like you for 2 years saying Georgia couldn't win a national championship with Stetson Bennett. And now they hear people say, I'm not quite so sure that Georgia can win a national championship without Stetson Bennett. None of these arguments matter. I mean, there are things in life that do matter, and some of that even kind of bleeds into college football from time to time. Admittedly, this is not one of those things. This is sort of the argument for the sport of it, argument for the sake of it. But nonetheless, in arguments like this, people still want to win. People still want to be right. And in the sort of normal course of having this argument, people are going to point out your logical fallacies, and that is an example of one of those. At one point in time, Stetson Bennett was sort of held up as the reason to be skeptical of Georgia. Now the absence of Stetson Bennett is being held up as a reason to be skeptical of Georgia. I think Georgia fans are rightly laughing at that and calling that out. Now, let me give you one more exchange here, which kind of points out a little bit more, Reese Davis, Kirk Herbstreit. Reese goes on to say, poor old Georgia, just try to scrape enough guys together to buckle the chin straps every Saturday. And Reese thinks he's clever when he says that. And Kirk Herbstreit kind of reacts back to that about it being, sarcastic. And I said this to our video audience before the show began today. I've had a few personal interactions with Kirk Herbstreit, several with Reese Davis. I think that both guys are probably pretty good dudes, the best I can possibly tell. I think they're both extraordinary on television. That's kind of the funny thing about this is, I'm kind of railing on them for this particular topic. The truth is, I'm actually kind of fans of both their work. At least in the case of Kirk Herbstreit, I think he's just terrible on Twitter. I think that very few prominent, famous personalities have had their brand tarnished more by their behavior on Twitter than Kirk Herbstreit is. I think that Herbstreit seems to write in a voice on Twitter that's just not very reflective of his genuine personality, I don't think. And some people are that way on Twitter. I think that Herbstreit's been hurt by his Twitter behavior. But ultimately, this is just sort of one of those things we do for fun. But I do think that Georgia fans are right to say, hey, we're the two-time national champs. We get to decide how much of a benevolent dictatorship we want to run here. And Georgia fans, if they choose not to be very generous while on top of the college football world, I honestly believe they're well within their rights to feel that way. They may, after a long time of waiting to be on the top, they may want all the spoils that come their way because of that, which means acknowledgement from guys like Reese Davis and Kirk Herbstreit. When Herbstreit, spends all summer long trotting out the same old tired Alabama argument that expired a year ago, when Reese Davis is touting a Michigan team that, fundamentally is just not on the same plane as Georgia, Georgia fans are well within their rights, I believe, to call that out, and I'm glad to see that they are. And that is Around the Dawghouse here today, poured by our friends at Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream. And on less than the most fun days, sometimes it's great to have something that just sort of makes you feel good. And for a lot of you, Dr. Pepper is that thing for me. And I'm so excited about having Dr. Pepper on board as a sponsor here for our Around the Dawghouse segment, and really, really excited about to tell you about something that you don't know about, because ultimately that's what a great ad does, right? It tells you about something that you weren't already aware of. And this, for me, is a brand new thing to consider. Dr. Pepper, strawberries and cream. And there's also a Dr. Pepper, strawberries and cream, zero sugar option for you there as well. How cool is this that Dr. Pepper's got a brand new permanent beverage offering that is made with obviously the same great flavor and the great care that Dr. Pepper has been made with for such a long time. So get out, try yourself some today. You can stop by and see it at your local Kroger. Anywhere you go shopping, you can find Dr. Pepper, strawberries and cream. What a really cool new introduction from our friends at Dr. Pepper, and it is so exciting to have them as a part of Around the Dawghouse here today. Now, something else that's really exciting is turning the page to SEC Media Days. It is next week. Georgia has, I think, a pretty impressive contingent of players going there. Kirby Smart always sends a strong message when the Dogs are on hand. This year, it is in Nashville. However, issues involving Georgia are not the only thing on tap for SEC Media Day. So let's do our part here right now to get ready to preview everything that's going to go down with this big event next week. A guy who'll be there on hand is Mike Griffith. He joins us here now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A little late getting to Mike, and I apologize for that. Want to be respectful of time here, and we'll put that in mind. Guess go ahead and just jump right into it. Mike had a lot to say before you join us. Now that you pop on, we'll kind of turn the page to SEC Media Days here for a moment, and I want to speak to you specifically with the players that Georgia selected. You know, I think that Cedric Von Prawn-Granger, kind of an easy guess who Georgia might send. I think it's appropriate they're sending Brock Bowers. I think it's nice to have best players in the country at events like this so the media can get acquainted with some of the cool stories happening around the league, not just for Georgia, but in other situations too when that's appropriate. And I think that Kamari Lassiter, as we've said a couple times this week on the show, a little bit of a signal that he's being invited to step up now and be a big part of what's going to happen for the Dogs on the field here this season. What did you make of the trio of players that Georgia has tabbed to go to Nashville next week?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm with you. I think Cedric Van Pran is clearly a team voice and a leader. He has been. I think right now leadership is something that, Kirby Smart's really, stressing as important for any team that's trying to three-peat. With some of the trappings of success comes complacency. And so you need to have leaders that'll, hold teammates accountable and keep the team focused. Remember, it was Van Pran last year got upset when they had the championship logo on the practice field and told the coaching staff, hey, take that off. We're not defending champs. This is a new season. So Cedric has already kind of, shown his, leadership abilities and his ability to focus on what's ahead and not get too comfortable. So his message will be, absolutely on track and consistent with what Kirby Smart's looking for. Brock Bowers is a guy, I call him a statue. When I think when we look back 10, 20, 30 years from now at the most integral player, I mean, this guy's been a matchup nightmare. Nobody's figured out how to stop him. I mean, Georgia goes to him when they want to. I think about the Florida game and the catch he made behind his back on what could have easily been a pick. I think about the Matrix play. I know that's one of your favorites as well. Maybe if he doesn't make that play, they may lose to Ohio State, I think about, just the catch and runs, as Tim Tebow said. Most tight ends catch a screen and go 8 yards. Brock can take it 80. So just because of his stature, potential Heisman Trophy candidate as well, I really believe that. I think it's appropriate. And we know Brock is not comfortable speaking. He'll tell you, I think he even said, I'm not good at this. But he's willing. And so while what he says may not be fetching or anything too insightful, it'll be dutiful. It'll be appropriate. He'll be complimentary of his teammates. I've spoken with him quite a bit. But he's not there to talk. He's there to play football. And then Lassiter, to your point, I think a kid who's really grown up in the program, and I think he's representative of what Kirby's all about in terms of the development. And you take a guy out of a Tuscaloosa area high school that. How does a guy like that get past Nick Saban, right? And, Lassiter is a guy, though, that I think he plays the game like Kirby wants. He's physical in the run game. I think he's a depth cover corner. I've seen him projected as a first-round pick. And yet he tells the story of development. He wasn't a five-star coming in. So, it's a good representation. I mean, I could have made, it's too bad there couldn't be more. I think Ladd McConkey is a fantastic spokesperson for the team. That's Tate Ratledge, another guy I think is wildly entertaining. Kendall Milton, certainly engaging. You can go down the list of other players that, could have gone there and done a good job representing. I mean, Javon Bullard, the defensive MVP of the championship game in the playoff. Malachi Starks, a rising star. Javon Dumas-Johnson, kind of the heart of the defense. So there were a lot of players that you could have chosen for this, but I think that these three guys will do a good job, and I think it's going to be really interesting.
I told Connor yesterday that I think that Brock Bowers right now might be the only player in the SEC, at least that I'm aware of, who I think ranks as a historic figure within his own program. In other words, you look at the three guys going to be representing each of the other teams there, or really any other player in the SEC right now. I'm not quite so sure that anybody else sort of rises to the level of being one of the small handful of best players in the history of that program, where I think that Brock Bowers is that way for Georgia. Now, he's not often considered in that fashion because, Georgia has been a little bit of an ensemble cast the last couple of years. I think fans like the idea of the big team, little me concept, no player standing tall above the rest of the team. I think fans enjoy that, but I also think as someone who kind of appreciates college football history, it's important to tell the story the right way. It's important to appreciate and recognize history as it plays out in front of you. And I do believe that one day when the story of Georgia's consecutive streak of championships, however long it goes into the future, when the story of this is told, I do think that Brock Bowers needs to be a prominent part of that. And so that's part of the reason why I'm glad he's at SEC Media Days, because I think it aids in acquainting him with media types who live in their own bubbles, in their own worlds. I'm talking about people kind of outside even the state of Georgia maybe in some respects. And I think it allows them to become more familiar with what has been a incredibly important and at times undercovered part of Georgia's championship success.
I agree. I mean, sometimes the national media can wrestle the truth out of the narrative. I cited this morning, the poll on DawgNation that I did. As far as favorite, Kirby wins, and by a landslide right now, a lot of people taking Georgia over Alabama in the CFP. But I saw a post this morning about the number 3 versus number 2 game of the century, Alabama and LSU. Well, didn't we have two number 1s facing off last year, Brand? I think you were sitting next to me in the press box when we saw the number 1 ranked Georgia team of the polls play the number 1 ranked Tennessee team undefeated in a late season game, according to the College Football Playoff Committee. To me, two number 1 teams is the game of the century. Okay, and the fact that game does not get the hype or Decker that it's there wasn't the star power someone. So there wasn't. It wasn't hype because there wasn't the star power. Doesn't hype equal star power? I think Nolan Smith's a star. I think Jalen Carter was a star. I think Javon Bullard is a star. I think Stetson Bennett proved himself a Heisman Trophy finalist. There were plenty. Brock Bowers, we just talked about, first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt. Statue likely. And there's no stars? Maybe just not the stars they choose. And that's kind of where I circle back to this whole Georgia narrative. And I think you spoke about it yesterday with, now Reese Davis and Kirk Herbstreit are downplaying that they don't have Georgia number 1. Well, joke all you want, but you didn't have number 1 last year either. And the fact of the matter is that Kirby Smart and Georgia don't get the same level of respect or hype, so to speak, that Nick Saban and Alabama do, even though they're a 2-time defending champ. And I'm with you. I think you need to have stars like Brock Bowers to represent and show that, look, Georgia's got just as good of players as anywhere else. They just play more within the team concept. The NFL recognizes that. As we've seen through the last 3 NFL drafts. I'm
curious about this. If we talk about issues on the field for Georgia, what the biggest question is next week, and I guess the thing I kind of center back to, Mike, is that, back during the spring, you kind of put everybody who's injured in the same category, and you just sort of say, we'll check on it again when you get to summer. Well, now it's summer. We're here. And I sort of think now we're about to see a little bit of a deviation of timelines here, and maybe this turns out to be wrong, but I get the sense that of a handful of defensive injuries, a lot of those shoulders. Those guys may be on their way back, but a little bit different kind of injury for Smile Mondon. His deal may be lingering a little bit longer, and that'll be of note for Georgia fans if that's true. Same thing for some of the running back stuff of, okay, what's going on with Branson Robinson here? And, what's going on with some of these guys that getting specific even almost like the granular level on some of these injuries, is going to probably be, I imagine, the number one source of curiosity for a lot of fans next week. Of it's not spring anymore. You don't put all the injuries in the same drawer. All of a sudden now you got to start trying to figure out, okay, who is likely to be available to begin the season and whose injury recovery may linger longer than that. I'm guessing that's going to be as hot a topic as anything for Georgia next week. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly one of the topics. I don't really know what'll be hot or what won't. It's hard to say, but you never really know how those media days are going to turn out. Remember, was it a couple of years ago when Nick Saban had just happened to mention Bryce Young having a $1 million NIL deal on radio that morning? I mean, you remember that. I mean, that was absolutely concocted, and Nick Saban did that on purpose, and it worked. He was asked about it at media day. It became a buzz. Nobody saw that coming. And then he would later, talk about what Texas A&M was doing, a story for another day, which was as hypocritical as it can be. But yes, the Georgia injuries, absolutely. And with you, Smile Munden is a pressing injury. And I'm not as much worried about Branson Robinson as long as Dejon and Kendall. I mean, to me, he's a number 3, and I don't even know if he'll hold that with the other Robinson in camp, looking so good, the freshman. We'll wait and see, right? To me, the defensive line drop-off is imminent. To what extent, right? We talk with Jeff Santel, and Santel says, well, they might drop off, but they'll still be the best in the SEC. Well, will they? I don't know. We've just taken it for granted that nobody can run on Georgia. Now maybe people can. So that's going to be, to me, interesting. I would say this on the injuries, though, Brandon. Because of the nature of the schedule, I think there's a little bit more of a grace period. I'm more interested in who's going to be 100% for Auburn. And that may sound arrogant or cocky or whatever you want to say, but, I actually had, speaking of Jeff, he ran a pretty good line by me yesterday. He said that he thinks Georgia could go undefeated with their schedule with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, which I think quarterback is another topic of discussion. So there's going to be all sorts of comments and directions and questions and, to your point, injuries. Not really sure what we'll get from Kirby. Not always the most transparent in that area, understandably. And then there's only so much he knows. I mean, 3 years ago he said JT Daniels was going to be ready for the start of the season, and he didn't start to the Mississippi State game. So you just never really know.
How about beyond this, just kind of finish this off? I have a couple of what I would imagine to be pretty significant issues for teams other than Georgia next week. I'm going to talk about some of those here in a moment. But to wrap up our conversation together, beyond Georgia, what are you interested in right now?
Did I see that Tommy Rees is a candidate for the Northwestern head coaching job?
Is that really out there? I hadn't seen that. Is that out there?
Yeah, I saw that on one of the Alabama websites. I mean, I don't know if they're just trying to puff their guy up as, hey, he really was a good hire, or if he actually is. I mean, I guess we'll find out, Brandon. I mean, the Alabama quarterback. I mean, and listen, the reason we talk about Alabama is because they're one of the bigger threats. I think LSU. I think we're going to pay more attention to LSU this year. A lot of people just look the other way with Brian Kelly. I said, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're all looking at Billy Napier. I mean, is this the guy? I mean, he's under fire. This is it. I mean, he might be a 3-year coach, be done. Is this year 2 of him? I mean, I don't even know. Does he get to year 3 with another losing record and all the money that Florida's putting into the facilities and now their stadium? And I saw an estimate of $400 million, but Edgar Thompson of the Orlando Sentinel-Knight Chat, he said it could end up being more like $1 billion before it's over with. When a program's putting that kind of money behind it and you're still not winning, I mean, that's a big year for Billy Napier. Nick Saban and LSU and Tennessee. What does Tennessee do now without Hendon Hooker? Is Joe Milton going to be able? So I look at quarterback stories. I think there's only 4 quarterbacks that are going to be at media days, by the way, maybe 5. Remember when everybody brought their quarterback? And then why didn't Georgia bring theirs, right? I mean, I think it's unsettled. I think that the Georgia quarterback situation is more unsettled than a lot of people care to admit. And the reason I say that is because the head coach told us that. And the head coach usually tells us, in so many words, if Kirby said it ain't done, it ain't done. If Kirby said only 25% of the hay's in the barn, then that means 75% is left during this offseason that we have not been able to monitor in the fall camp ahead. So certainly Georgia will be a big story going for a three-peat. The Alabama quarterback situation, to recap. What's Texas A&M going to say about Bobby Petrino? Probably not much. There's a story there. Don't know that we get it at media days. Brian Kelly and LSU, do they have the depth to make a championship run? They certainly seem to have the star power on the front lines. And then Tennessee, are they the biggest threat in the East? Or could someone else creep out of the shadows and pull the upset like South Carolina did at Georgia in 2019? So to me, a lot of things to go out of ground to cover. Should be a ton of fun.
All right, Mike, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. I'm sure you'll have plenty more coming at DawgNation.com. We will read that and, of course, talk to you again very soon.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
One quick point on the quarterback thing, then we'll move on. You know, Mike has sort of echoed that now a couple of weeks in a row, his belief that this Georgia quarterback competition is still open. Mike might even say wide open, just based on some of the way in which he's talked. I think this is one of those things where I would use history as a guide here a little bit. If that is true, Smart has a tendency to leave clues about some of this kind of stuff. I go back to 2017 as a for instance on this, which is a long time ago now. I mean, we have a lot of folks, younger folks who may not have, much. It's weird to say this, but 2017, not everybody has the same level of memory of, and frankly, some of my memories fade over time too. But if you want to go back to summer of 2017, this is Jacob Eason going into a sophomore year. This is Jake Fromm, who will obviously join us again this week. This is Jake Fromm going into his true freshman year. There was a lot of time that summer, Paul Feinbaum interviews, things like that, where Kirby took the time to talk up Jake Fromm. Kirby took the time of pushing the idea of it being a competition. So this is one of those things where if history is the guide, and Kirby Smart really is looking to see a competition be decided moving towards the end of the summer or even into the season, then Kirby Smart will intentionally and specifically talk up a quarterback other than Carson Beck. And the more Smart sort of speaks in generalities about that, the less serious I probably take it, the idea that anybody other than Beck is going to be the guy. Sometimes you ever read some of those books where it's like the Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or I guess Malcolm Gladwell had Blink. Sometimes you just sort of have this instinctive thought. Like my instinctive thought during G-Day was Carson Beck's going to be Georgia's quarterback. And that's not really the attitude I went into spring practice with. It really wasn't. I had some skepticism about Carson Beck. I've expressed that before. But during G-Day, and it's more of just the feeling. You can't really kind of point to anything specific necessarily. It's just more just the feeling of this seems set up for Carson Beck. This seems like Carson Beck is the inevitable, eventual starting quarterback for Georgia. So we'll see if Kirby Smart gives any kind of specific credence to an idea other than that next week at SEC Media Days. We'll, of course, be watching that closely. Shifting gears here, how about cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean? And, boy, we've told you before, excited about all the new things that Royal Caribbean's got in store here for 2024. And this is one of the great things about Royal Caribbean, a market leader anyway, who's still pushing to grow and get better each and every year. Hopefully we're all the same way. And for Royal Caribbean in 2024, that means introducing 2 brand new ships. One of those I've told you about for quite some time now, Icon of the Seas. When it debuts, it will be the largest cruise ship ever constructed. It's going to be unlike anything you've ever seen before, largest water park at sea, essentially like a floating beach resort there as well, but also great amenities, 40-plus bars, something like that, all kinds of specialty restaurants for someone who is kind of into all this, some new concepts being introduced, unlike anything that Royal Caribbean's ever had on a cruise ship before. That's really exciting. Cannot wait for Icon of the Seas. But then in addition to that, how about July of 2024, the debut of Utopia of the Seas there as well? This one particularly interesting for me because it's going to be the latest and the most recent in the Oasis class of ships. It's going to be sailing, understand, out of Port Canaveral, doing some of those 3- and 4-night sailings. This is a brand new offering from Royal Caribbean here. It begins this year with Allure of the Seas. Of course, that's going to house us for our Dog Nation cruise, and continue with Utopia of the Seas. Those 3- and 4-night sailings on an Oasis-class ship, something that Royal Caribbean's never done before. By the way, speaking of the Dog Nation cruise, Allure of the Seas, one of the largest ships currently sailing. We're going to be on it. Dog Nation cruise, bigger and better for 2024, April 22nd through the 26th. Go to royaldogs.com to find out more information about that. That is royaldogs.com. It is going to be an incredible time. All right, so SEC Media Days next week. Let me give you a few thoughts here in no particular order about what I will think is interesting next week. I think there's a comparison between LSU and Alabama that sort of speaks to opposite sides of the same coin. A lot of this relates to quarterback. And the thing about LSU that's probably the most interesting right now is, and you have to be kind of very much into the inside media baseball to even care about this one way or another, but there's a little bit of a debate about whether or not LSU is an overlooked team or about whether or not LSU is the team that too many people are talking about. And to me, this is completely explained by the way in which the conversation has shifted around LSU over the course of the calendar year. We are, of course, entrenched in college football each and every day, and so we're kind of following the EKG, the ups and downs of everything that goes on. And at one point in time, January, February, it seemed like at that point, and you can go back and see some of the evidence for yourself, it seems like at the time, LSU was being completely disregarded. Unfairly so, we thought. Go back and think about early playoff predictions, things like that. At one point in time, ESPN put out a bunch of their scribes. I'm assuming a lot of those are still employed, but a lot of their folks who put those playoff predictions out. You saw Georgia on almost every single one of them, and you commonly saw Alabama mentioned as a second SEC team making the playoff. At the time, LSU was not really a thought in a lot of the sort of national media types' mind, it didn't seem. Well, over the course of the last few months, admittedly, that has changed. LSU is being talked about more now. We're left to conclude why that might be. Sometimes it's the simplest answer that is most likely to be the correct answer. In this particular case, I think people have pivoted towards LSU because they were unimpressed by what they saw from Alabama during spring practice. Alabama has a lot going for it. It may have one of the best offensive lines in the country. Other than Georgia, it may be the second best in the entire country here this year. Alabama's going to probably still be pretty good defensively. Dallas Turner is one of the very best players in the nation. Caleb Downs, I believe, has a chance to be a sensational freshman, the mold of other terrific freshman defensive backs that have existed in the SEC. Bama's going to probably run the ball okay. Once again, freshman running backs probably helping them do that there as well. But on paper, as it appears right now, Alabama does not have a quarterback, at least not a national championship level quarterback. And because of that and the sort of unspectacular spring the Crimson Tide had, and the going out and grabbing Tyler Buckner, who may have been no better than the number 3 quarterback at Notre Dame, this has caused people to want to reconsider LSU a little bit more. That's why there's this debate of, well, is LSU overhyped or overlooked? It's been a different answer depending on which month you've sort of checked in on that. And the statement we repeatedly said about LSU, we will say one more time. There are at least 2 quarterbacks in the LSU roster better than anything Alabama has. That's why we like the Tigers in the West in what will be the final year of the SEC West. A couple of other issues here quickly. Tennessee, to me, is a fascinating team for a simple reason. Tennessee and its fan base and the internal conversation would seem to be all about taking that next step and putting themselves squarely, evenly, equally on the same plane as like a Georgia and an Alabama. Now, last year, Tennessee beat Alabama, but the final 2 games of the regular season didn't exactly support that big marquee win very much. Getting quasi-embarrassed by Georgia sort of didn't help either, although you don't have to apologize for losing to UGA. The point is, after beating Alabama, Tennessee didn't exactly follow that up very well. So the conversation in Knoxville is all about taking that next step and becoming a true legitimate playoff contender and not just some, paper tiger playoff contender constructed out of thin air by ESPN at the expense of some gullible fans who believed it. It's about sort of becoming real and substantial and something that really does have long-term staying power. But concurrent to that, there's also the conversation taking place in Gainesville, Florida, and probably most specifically in Columbia, South Carolina, possibly Auburn there as well, about actually trying to move to the spot where Tennessee has been. Because there's always that going on in the SEC. And this sort of constant sort of zero-sum game that is this league, folks are trying to climb the ladder. That's what Tennessee's trying to do. But while that's happening, the South Carolinas, the Auburns, the Floridas, the programs who are a level below that are trying to climb up to where Tennessee is and perhaps overtake them in doing so. I think the team that's currently probably best positioned to do that may be South Carolina. I think Shane Beamer's first couple of years on campus in Columbia have actually been underrated. Now, taking the next step for him or anybody is not necessarily easy, but South Carolina is probably worth watching, as well as second-year Billy Napier, first-year coach Hugh Freeze, in terms of kind of getting some of the buzz that Tennessee enjoyed a year ago. I was going to say something about Bobby Petrino and Texas A&M, but I'll just sort of save that for another day. Let me instead do this really quick. 2 other slight issues, and then we'll move on after that. I think where SEC Media Days is taking place this year is interesting. It's Nashville. a lot of you know, Nashville's become this incredible weekend destination. It's one of the most popular tourist attractions in our destinations, I should say. One of the most popular tourist destinations in our entire country. The overall population around Nashville, the suburbs, Brentwood, things like that, Union City, they have really grown there as well. That Nashville's become kind of a big town, and they're building a brand new stadium. It's going to have a retractable roof, and you almost wonder if this event, SEC Media Days, taking place in Nashville. Of course, the basketball tournament's been there before, but this is probably as much of an SEC spotlight as maybe Nashville's ever had on it. And you kind of wonder, in future years, is Atlanta, which has kind of been the unquestioned capital city of the SEC, is Atlanta going to have some competition in that moving forward? I wonder if this is Nashville's attempt to sort of throw its hat in the ring on all of that. That'll be worth paying attention to. And then finally, I'll just say this. There is undeniably sort of a weird vibe that's going to exist in the SEC and throughout the rest of college football here this fall. In a lot of ways, this is a lame duck season. Now, we don't recognize that here around Dog Nation because Georgia's going for a third straight national championship. And for most of us, that's so interesting that nothing else really seems to matter right now. But if you're not a Georgia fan, if you're not firmly entrenched within Dog Nation, you're spending most of your year thinking about what next year is going to be like. And sometimes in, life, work, whatever else, there's just sort of these lame duck moments when you are just sort of playing out the string, ready for a new thing to start. This is kind of one of those times where next year we get an expanded SEC. Texas and Oklahoma will be in the league. My guess is there'll be a lot of Texas and Oklahoma-related questions at SEC Media Days next week. Next year, nationally. The college football playoff also expands there as well, and there will be a lot of attention paid to that. So if you're not a Georgia fan, thankfully most of us are, but if you're not a Georgia fan, the lame duck nature of this season is going to be hard to ignore. You'll see a lot of that next week at SEC Media Days. Not exactly the most exciting thing to consider, but for a lot of people, this is just simply biding time until the real change takes place in 2024. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. There are some days when you sort of feel like you could use a drink, right? And for me, when I'm using a drink or need one, a nice, enjoyable cocktail, I'm thinking about a ready-to-drink cocktail that comes right out of the can, like our friends at the Finished Long Drink provide. You've been hearing me talk about the famous flavors of the Finished Long Drink for a long time, but are you aware now the Finished Long Drink has also debuted the brand new peach flavor there as well. And this is one of those things I want you to be aware of, I wanted to make sure that you know about, because it's available for limited times. If you've tried the cranberry, if you've tried the traditional, the blue can with the grapefruit flavor, if you've tried some of those really cool things the Finished Long Drink is known for, it's also time to try the newest flavor of the Finished Long Drink there as well. The peach flavor of the Finished Long Drink. Nothing is more Georgia than that. A little peach flavor here in the peach state here this summer. So go to thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code, find out where you can pick up some today. People have been raving about it. I am so excited about this brand new introduction from our friends at the Finished Long Drink. Try the peach flavored version of the Finished Long Drink today. I absolutely love our golden shoe today. I think it's extraordinary. We have been talking as of late about the sheer size of some of the recent Georgia offensive line commits. Very, very tall, very, very big, blocking out the sun, but also blocking any would-be tacklers ahead of Georgia quarterbacks, ball carriers in the future, including those lousy, stinking Gators, apparently. Let me show you this on the screen. This is so funny. Admittedly, it kind of works more as a visual than something to be described audio, but it's worth sharing here today. UGA Nation 412 shared this with me. He says, at the rate Georgia keeps recruiting the massive humans on the offensive line the way they have, this is what the cocktail party is going to look like for many years to come. And what you see is kind of a giant version of the Georgia offensive line, and next to that, bottom right-hand corner of your screen, a very, very tiny little Florida defensive line. That is certainly a nice visual to describe what it might be like in the future when Georgia takes on those lousy, stinking Gators. UGA Nation 412, incredibly funny, well-deserved golden shoe going in your direction. By the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about our Gator Hater updater and countdown? 108 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. That is certainly a fun thing to think about. And we will see you tomorrow at DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They will do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them. on all of that today. So we'll take your comments, and if you're just joining us, I'm sure you may have some questions. We had a statement off the top of the program, and on some of the stuff that's out there, I'm going to have to leave it at that. So we shall see kind of how it goes here today. Foster Moss says, don't do that voice again. The little squeaky version of the Florida DL. Yeah, I guess I probably don't need to be doing that. It's sort of hard for me to get into falsetto, but there you go. Nature Gator says the Florida front four this year is going to have a guy who weighs 440 pounds. Well, sounds like he needs to hit the nutrition table a little bit. Thomas Van Santa saying nice shirt today. I appreciate that, Thomas. Thank you very much. So I'll admit one of the things I'm not super good at is I don't know a lot of y'all's like various handles. So is that Thomas T-Bone 86? Is that his Twitter handle? Because Thomas is a great commenter. I didn't quite realize that's who that was. I apologize for that. I'm not good at some of that kind of stuff. Crow King 123 on YouTube says, do you think a star could emerge on the defensive line here this year? And I think the answer to that question is potentially yes. Now, I think that Georgia is going to rotate a lot of its veterans there a lot, and some of what Georgia's counting on is Zion Logue just sort of being Zion Logue, Warren Brinson just sort of being Warren Brinson. Those guys providing, a slightly more seasoned and experienced version of themselves is probably kind of enough. But at times last year we saw Bear Alexander flash for UGA. He's gone now, but at times last year we'll admit that he kind of flashed. Well, if he was capable of doing that last season, could a guy like Jordan Hall be capable of doing that this season? I think, of course, the answer to that question could be yes. So within the context of a lot of rotating and a lot of depth and playing a bunch of guys, especially as Mike pointed out, maybe early in the season, there will be those chances to see some wow factor on that. And, for me, a lot of this is also going to come on kind of that edge rusher spot too, because it seems like you kind of lump those edge guys in with the defensive line from time to time because of the role that they play. You could definitely see stars emerge there, I think. That's the case. Motivated Dedicated says we are really deep along the defensive line. Seems to be the case, and I do expect Georgia. I mean, I'll be shocked if anyone has a demonstrably better offensive line than Georgia does. I'd just be kind of shocked on that. Like Kirby Smart's going to stop the run. Like, when's the last time that Georgia did not have a really effective run stop? Probably beginning of the 2018 season. There was a time early 2018 when Georgia was not very good at stopping the run. But then Jordan Davis was a true freshman. He kind of stepped in. They got way better, way fast on that. By the end of the year, they were. I don't know, they were, lighting the world on fire, but they were fine. But you have to probably go back early 2018 to find a time. I mean, Georgia was not great defensively in 2020, but nobody really was. But the run wasn't really the issue back then, right? They didn't have, Alabama was running those rub routes. Florida was running those wheel routes. Like, that was more of the product of not practicing very much, it seemed like. I mean, listen, our kids sometimes we're just driving down the road. They ask all these questions. They're just always asking questions, right? And my daughter was like, "What's the weirdest year of your life?" And I didn't hesitate. 2020. It's not a hesitation. It's not a. You don't have to spend any time thinking about that. No year in my life has ever been weirder than 2020. Most of us probably say the same way. And the product we saw on the football field is the best embodiment of that whatsoever. Like the one thing that is Georgia's hallmark is, how well prepared they are for everything they do. And they were a haphazard mess in 2020. Most teams were. It was just a really weird year. That's one of the reasons why I've kind of, really grown to respect Carson Beck, because in one of the interviews that Beck did with one of those podcasts he was on or whatever, I mean, he was like, yeah, 2020 was so strange. And he talked about how weird that it was. Sometimes just sort of speaking out loud the truth is valuable. And he did. Let's see what else. What else is going on? We talked about, potential breakouts. Frank Patterson mentioned Samuel Mpemba. He could be one. I'm also looking at Marvin Jones Jr., who I do believe is going to be pretty healthy, healthier than he was last season, certainly. And Damon Wilson's a guy that I'm really watching very closely, too. Spencer Clark says, what if FCS and HBCU schools started getting some of those players that sat on the bench some Power 5 programs would shake things up a little bit. Unfortunately, Spencer, we have some fairly substantial evidence that the opposite is happening. There is a real talent drain from the lower levels of college football right now. Go look at this. Almost no Group of 5 players got drafted this year. We probably had fewer of those. I don't want to say something that's not true, but my sense is we probably had fewer Group of 5 and lower players drafted this year than ever before. That unfortunately, the transfer portal and some of that kind of stuff, maybe NIL, in some cases small NIL deals maybe even, talented FCS players, talented Group of 5 players are leaving those schools and they're going to the Power 5. Now Georgia's not really recruiting those ranks very much, but other places are, and that's just really, really tough. In fact, I've even gone so far as to say is that at one point in time there were a handful of Group of 5 jobs that would be thought to be okay jobs to have, and if you were looking to sort of get your head coaching career started, nothing wrong with taking an FCS job as a way of doing that. But just given the exodus of talent from those lower levels, I'm not quite so sure even those mid-level Group of 5s, lower-level FCSs, I'm not quite so sure those head coaching positions are even quite as attractive anymore, because unfortunately, anybody who can get into the Power 5, to the largest, highest level, biggest level of college football, they seem fairly intent on doing that. Spencer Clark says we play those guys a couple weeks. Those, so he's chatting about some stuff that's going on there. Let me go to DawgNation.com just for a minute. Dave Snow checking in, as he does from Kenya, saying, with this schedule, looking forward to a ton of young dogs getting significant time. It helps for 2024. I think it does, and I do think that kind of stuff also makes otherwise unenjoyable games more entertaining, because ultimately, we have a lot wrapped up in college football. Our state's economy is kind of tied into college football a little bit. A lot of our sort of sentimental, memories of our loved ones kind of tied up in college football. So we clearly make college football into a very big thing, because when our favorite team wins, it benefits us in a lot of ways. But at the base level, this is still entertainment. And Georgia, Tennessee Martin is just not that entertaining. It's just not. There's very little intrigue with the final score. I mean, frankly, it's not even that fun to bet it, because when the line is 50 or whatever it's going to be, the sort of variance at the end of a game like that so crazy that it's a coin flip one way or another. I mean, not even gambling makes a game like that fun for the most part, just because when the expected margin of victory is so high, there's just so much variance that kind of gets entered into the conversation. But when you are talking about, I got to see so-and-so play, and it becomes this deal where you got your binoculars out and you're just trying to count the 11 guys in the field, and you're trying to just sort of see who those guys are, and you may see a young player get in there and do something big, and all of a sudden that's like, I told you he's going to be good. I told you he's going to be good. That's how we make those games that otherwise might not be very interesting. That's how we, as Georgia fans, make them into something interesting. I think you're right about that. Randy Hall says, who do you think the next commitment's going to be? I don't know about next, but the small handful of guys I very much got my eye on right now: Williams, the linebacker; Frazier, the running back. Obviously Winery going, because what is today? The 12th? Is today the 12th? Yeah, today's the 12th. So we're less than a month out on Winery and Bolden. The question you're asking is, okay, what happens before that? Do you have anything for the rest of July? I mean, it's probably Williams and Frazier. That's who you're looking at maybe the most right now. Am I leaving out somebody really important when I say that? Joe Garliardi says, what about Christian Miller? That's a good example. That's a good example of a guy who could be ready for more. A really good example on that, for sure. So if you're looking for a breakout, yeah, it could be one of those guys. Because I'm always liking those guys that have been in the program for a year. I think there's some real value there. That's pretty good. Cam Hasty says that photo we showed for our Golden Shoe reminded him of the old days of when Trey Hill was center and you had those big tree trunk guys all standing next to him. Yeah, I mean, there's just something like, when you see a big offensive line, I love the way in which the offensive line kind of marches towards the line of scrimmage to get set for a play. I mean, sometimes people say we get a little bit too militaristic with the way we talk about football, but there is something about that just sort of looks like a marching force. And I love the impressive visual image when you got a big offensive line just spread across and shoulder to shoulder, and there's just something really imposing about that. And I mean, I think that John Stinchcomb and others will tell you no better bond that exists than with those offensive linemen because they do everything together. They play together. There's a little bit of a dance that goes on with these offensive linemen. And, when you see those big guys marching to sort of set the line and really establish the battle spot, there's something really cool about that. I think that's true. Cam Hasty says we should call the peach flavor the finished dog drink. I like that. Johnny Surf Dog talking about the idea of play calling in here a little bit. I do believe there is a certain art to this. And just one of those things that you got to kind of be in sort of a free-flowing spirit to be able to do it. I think that's the case. BMAC also says that it's great that the media comes out and doesn't put Georgia first, more fodder for the coaches to push the players. Could be the case. That could certainly be the case. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. We're ready to wrap up shortly after that. All right, on Facebook here today. Denise White-Loper, Miriam Corbin talking about playing golf in Italy. Important to remember the Ryder Cup is going to be in Italy this year. I don't know much about the course, but the Ryder Cup is in Italy this year. Let us see what else. Denise White-Loper says she's looking forward to seeing Cedric Von Prawn at Media Days. Me as well. Really glad that he's coming back to Georgia here this year. Daryl Fleming excited about what Kendall Milton may do this season. Justifiable reason to feel that way, I believe. Bill Sanders says the early line on the opener is 43.5 points. One of the reasons that point spreads exist is because they make games more even, more interesting for some people. Even if you don't bet them, thinking about it from a point spread standpoint sometimes just makes the game a little closer in your mind, right? Like if Ole Miss played Middle Tennessee State, it's like, well, you expect Ole Miss to win, so therefore the game's not worth watching. But if the question is, well, can they beat them by more than 24 points? Well, all of a sudden now that becomes a little bit more interesting. But when the line is 43.5 or whatever it was he just said, that's actually, even that is not that interesting because, the difference between a win by 37 and a win by 49 is oftentimes a very weird bounce very late in the game when maybe non-scholarship players are in the game. And, that's just kind of the deal there on that. Let's see what else. William Camacho says, no doubt in my mind, we have the best offensive line in the SEC. When it comes to protecting the quarterback, I am excited about that too, William. And I believe you're probably right. Miriam says, can't wait for media days because that means fall camp is right behind right around the corner, and the season's around the corner there too. Only 6 more Saturdays. Boy, when you put it like that, Miriam, it sounds like it's going to be here before you know it. I really, really like that. Randy Hall says Frazier and Williams the hot takes, and then Riddick's going to make his decision on July 26th. So, yeah, you're expecting a little bit of attrition out of the class, and then, you kind of see what Georgia does there around that. DT says he enjoys a good beatdown. Those games are certainly fun to take family to and kids to because, listen, a lot of times kids just like seeing their favorite team just drag the opponent. It's like, kids have always like Harlem Globetrotters and things like that, and they got the Savannah Bananas. They always like that kind of stuff because they want to see the good guys win, the bad guys get embarrassed. And so when the bad guys are Tennessee Martin, that's a little bit easier to do. Cam Hasty. I better not read that, but that's pretty funny, Cam. That's pretty funny. Talking about a Georgia Tech Russia battle at Wimbledon, asking me who I'm rooting for. That's pretty funny. It reminds me of a joke that my dad used to always say back when the Soviet national team back in the 80s came in and played Tech one time in an exhibition basketball game about rooting for the Soviets against Tech. Not the classiest joke, but it just reminds me of my dad. That's funny. DT bringing up a good point that if Tennessee Martin is only a 40-something point underdog against Georgia, does that mean they're better than TCU? DT, that's actually a pretty interesting point. Low Country Dog says the Twiggs County Sheriff's Department checking in to say they miss you, BA. So my I-16 speeding ticket was not in Twiggs County. It was in Dublin. Dublin is Lawrence County. Is that right? Is that right? Lawrence County? Y'all, this was a good long time ago. That bad boy was $400. 89 and a 70, $400. I ain't sped since then, especially not going through there anyway. And, it's one of those things where, like, my wife's always like, you better watch out. You better watch out every time we're driving through there, because we like to drive on I-16. We like to go over towards the coast, and 16, I think, is the best way to get over. It's almost like if you give me a choice a lot of times of, like, driving straight down 75 or shooting across 16 and going 95, sometimes I just think just a better drive, less traffic to get over on 95 as quick as you can. But you cannot speed through there. You cannot speed through there. You just can't. And I got hit bad there. $400 a long time ago. $400 back then for me, and $400 would be a lot today. $400 was an oppressive punishment 20 years ago, whenever that was, that all went down. Expensive. So yeah, listen, I don't condone speeding, things like that, but I've had a little bit of a lead foot over the years. Like I said, I got when I was 18. I wasn't trying to be like wild kid or anything like that. I was just trying to see how fast I could drive. Stupid, just so stupid. Right there on 985 in Gainesville. If y'all can picture this. So right there, what used to be called Exit 6, right there where the Huddle House used to be, coming down that hill on 985, driving way too fast, just stupid, idiotic, so dumb. And it wasn't the blue lights, it was the headlights. That police car was sitting off on the side. Headlights came on, and that feeling in your stomach of, oh gosh, what has happened? One of the worst feelings. And you'd think I'd have gotten scared straight, but I got 3 more tickets after that. So like I said, I don't condone it, but I have dealt with it. Randy Hall says, what's the first high school game I'm calling? I'm calling 1,000 games for the Corky Kell Classic, which I'm so excited about. I need to get all that out, because I don't have it memorized right now. But I'm calling so many games for the Corky Kell Classic, and it's going to be here before you know it. All right, back over to YouTube just for a minute. Let's see what else. So Harry mentioned something about, Harry, I invite you to go back to the top of the show. Had some stuff to say there then. And so if you want to hear on that, go back to the top of the show. You can hear what I had to say about that then. Jay Shipes have a personal driver now. If only that were the case. If given the choice of, like, let's say I was like obscenely, cartoonishly rich, I believe I probably would have a chauffeur. I don't hate driving, but I believe I probably would have a chauffeur. Sit in the back, just kind of chill out. I believe I probably would do that. I think that'd be kind of nice. I don't do a lot of, like, when you live out in the suburbs like I do. I probably don't take Uber as much as 90% of y'all do. I probably Uber as infrequently as almost anybody does, just because I live out in the suburbs. Don't really need to all that much, but I do like being driven around. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says, I wonder, will McConkey still get his touches despite the knee issues? I'm guessing that Lamb McConkey is going to be a big part of what Georgia does here this year. Jonathan Aaron asking about Wingo, the wide receiver. I don't quite know where all of that's going. We heard about Wingo post-official visit. We have not heard much since then. Typically speaking, no news is not usually good news in recruiting. I'm not certainly tagging the toe or proclaiming anything to be over there in regards to that. But oftentimes I don't find no news to be good news. But who knows? Maybe the real recruitment there has not even gotten started yet. I guess one of the things I'm also pretty curious about, like when I have a bias, I try to put it out there and let y'all know it, and you can decide what to do with it, right? Like, I try to be pretty open about that. given a choice among relative equals, I'm going to be biased in favor of the in-state guy most often. I really like Mike Matthews a lot. And I have no way of saying for sure that he's better than Ryan Wingo or better than Jeremiah Smith or whatever else. I just seen Matthews play. I'm going to get a chance to see him play some this fall too. I just have a little bit of a tendency to gravitate towards guys that I see play in person. So one of my big questions with the receiver spot, like I said, I'm not moving off of Wingo, but one of the questions I find myself asking is there some way that Georgia can kind of pivot back towards Matthews before this cycle is over with? Some of y'all joke about me speaking something into existence. If that's something I could speak into existence, that's something I would certainly be very interested in doing. Dennis Kendi says his first ticket was 82 and a 55. Unfortunately, mine was, when you subtract the numerator from the denominator, mine was actually a little worse than that, unfortunately. Like I said, I got put in the back of the car. And let me tell you something. That was not a pleasant situation. They took me downtown. They did not put me in a cell, thankfully, because I don't believe I would have lasted very long. But they like fingerprinted me and perp walked me and mugshotted me and all that kind of stuff. I had to do all that kind of stuff. That was not fun. It's been 1995, I guess it would have been. All right, let's see what else. Bill Russell. So I'm telling an interesting story. Richard D says that Dylan Riley has been shouting out Nate Frazier. I'm telling you, Dylan's fun about this kind of stuff. Fans enjoy that, right? Whether it really helps or not, who really knows? But Dylan shouted out Williams Winery going back a few weeks ago, shouting out Frazier right now. People really like Frazier as running back too. So Dylan's pretty active on social media, and I certainly like that. Let's see what else. Zach Adams says, only an hour and 20 minutes late today. What did I miss? Well, Zach, we're glad you're here. And just in time for me to wrap things up. All right, we're going to go for today. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And make sure you check out our friends at R.S. Andrews. By the way, pretty soon, R.S. Andrews Go With The Flow going to be returning. Speaking of point spreads and gambling, things like that, we will make our picks against the spread. You can laugh at me when I'm wrong. All of that will be on tap here very soon. I love doing that with Dari Payro, our buddy from R.S. Andrews, and it will be here before you know it. So find that out when it happens, but also find R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. This is a true story. My wife came down the other day. She's like, we're going to have to call R.S. Andrews. We got some sort of plumbing issue going on. So I guess R.S. Andrews, if you're listening, be staying tuned because we may be calling you here pretty soon. But if you have any kind of issue like that, some sort of plumbing thing, gosh knows I'm not messing with water because who knows what happens if you do the wrong thing there. Or air conditioning. Obviously, that's really important to stay cool and comfortable this summer and when you can. So R.S. Andrews can help you out with that too. So find them online, rsandrews.com. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown and DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Before that, 9:45 for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com, 10 a.m. after that. We will talk to you then, everybody.